Alright, so here we go with the third and final part of the video lecture for chapter number 13, all about the Mongols. But now we're not going to look at the Mongols, we're going to look at another group of nomadic people who had an equally important impact on world history across Europe and Asia, and that would be, wait for it, the Turks. Alright, so the Turks, let's talk about the Turks. We've mentioned them before. But it's worth repeating some of the, their origins and stuff like that. So the Turks, they come from Central Asia, right? They're kind of like neighbors, they're cousins to the Mongols. And they come from Central Asia, which would be, somewhere around here. And sometimes they come in as migrants, like they migrate into the Middle East, they migrate into, Anatolia, which is, Turkey, or what used to be the Byzantine Empire. Or sometimes they come in as invaders, right? For example, some of the Turks invaded northern India, establishing the Sultanate of Delhi. So the first two groups of Turks are going to be the Seljuk and the Ghaznavid Turks. So these are Central Asian people, right? They're looking to migrate to settle into agricultural lands. And what we see is that they're going to tend to blend in. They're going to be pretty good at integrating themselves with the established society and culture. And what we tend to see is that they will adopt Islam pretty frequently. And over time, the Turks are going to gain economic and political power within the established, governments. So they're not like the Mongols who, destroy everything and then rebuild everything. The Turks kind of just blend themselves in and rise within the ranks. And we see this beginning with some of what we call the Seljuk Turks. They're going to migrate into the Abbasid Caliphate, into the territories across the Middle East. And over time, they're going to rise in importance and in wealth and in power. And eventually they're going to establish a new leader of the Caliphate. So the Caliph becomes kind of like the religious symbolic leader, but the real political power, like behind the scenes, will be the Sultan, right? Just like the Sultanate of Delhi, ruled over northern India, we have sultans, right? And Sultan is the Turkish term for emperor. So the Seljuk Turks, they're going to blend in, mix in with the, different Muslims across the Middle East, right? From Persia to Egypt to Arabia, Mesopotamia, right? And so they're going to blend themselves in. Sometimes these Turks, kind of like the first generation of Turks, they were called the Mamluks. And the Mamluks had been imprisoned, enslaved, I should say, by the Abbasids. And the Abbasids will kind of, regret that, because eventually the Mamluks will rise up and kind of like help overthrow it or destabilize the Abbasid Empire. But the Seljuk Turks, again, they rise up within the ranks of the established social order, the established political order within the Abbasid Empire or the Caliphate. But their power is going to be diminished because they are going to be destroyed by the Mongols. Right? It is the Seljuks ruling class that is going to be destroyed when the Mongols destroyed Baghdad. Now the Ghaznavid Turks, right? These are more of the invading type of Turks, and these are the ones that moved into northern India, right? Their leader, of course, was Mahmud of Ghazni, and when they adopt Islam, they're going to be very intolerant, right? These are the guys who are destroying Buddhist and Hindu temples and imposing the jizya tax over the majority Hindu population in northern India. But again, they're also Turks, right? They also came from the same homeland in Central Asia. So let's talk about the Mamluks, right? So again, the Mamluks were Turkish slaves, right? Originally, they weren't Muslim, right? Which is why they were enslaved. Remember, the Muslims, they can't enslave other Muslims. They can't enslave people with a book. So the Muslims were, and the Mamluks were enslaved, and they were forced to fight. They were forced to be part of the military of the Abbasid Caliphate. And many of them these Mamluk Turks, they eventually convert to Islam. So they're supposed to be free, but they weren't really free. So then they rebelled, and they created their own like caliphate. So they even have their own country, their own government in Egypt. They established a new capital. Right? It used to be Alexandria, right, which goes back to Alexander the Great. But they established a new capital, which is the modern day capital of Egypt, which is Cairo. And they're the ones who actually stopped the Mongols, right? When the Abbasids collapsed, right, when Baghdad was destroyed, it is the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt that unites with Christian crusaders to stop the advancements of the of the Mongols. So the Mamluks, again, they convert to the religion, they grow in power, they overthrow the government, the Abbasids, and they create their own country in Egypt. The last group, and probably the most important or longest lasting one, are the Ottoman Turks. And the Ottoman Turks are named Ottoman because they followed a guy called Osman. And Ottoman means follower of Osman. And he was given the title of Sultan. And his people had migrated. They migrated into, back then it was called Anatolia. Of course, nowadays it's known as Turkey. And in fact, the country of Turkey is named after the Ottoman Turks. So this is kind of like the last group of migrations of the Turks. They will migrate into Anatolia, and these are the people who are most responsible for conquering the Byzantines, right? They are the ones who will, migrate into Anatolia. They will take away the land, and eventually, by 1450, all that's left is Constantinople, right? And in 1454, the Ottoman Turks, they're led by a sultan called Mehmed, and he will be the conqueror of Constantinople, right, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire by, at the end of the post-classical era in 1450. So this is a famous, sketch or drawing of the conquest of Constantinople, right? Remember, Constantinople lasted for 1,000 years, right? The Byzantine Empire lasted for 1,000 years. Their defenses of the city were so strong that it was considered impossible for anyone to ever conquer them, yet the Ottoman Turks did. Right, and this was the guy who was credited for this conquest. His name was Sultan Mehmed II, and if you look at his face, you could kind of see how he's like, I did it. Tamerlane. All right, so we have the Turks kind of mixing and matching and blending into the Middle East and into northern India and into Anatolia, right? And then the Mongols kind of come in and mess everything up and destabilize everything. The regions that are under the Mongol rules will, be, stable and part of the, what we call the Khanates. But other parts, eventually those, the Khanates don't last long. Like the Ilkhanate of Persia, for example, lasts a very short amount of time. So there's a lot of power vacuum in the, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. And within that vacuum, we see another force come to power. And this guy's name is Tamerlane. Sometimes he's known as Timurlane or Timur the Lame, which is the European name. And he's part Mongol and he's also part Turkish, right? So he's, Central Asian. So the Turks and the Mongols already, come in.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, I thought Mr. Dominguez